Andy Stanley is the head pastor of North Point Church, and he has written about 52 books, talk about some time on your hand, and has several podcasts and has been the featured speaker of conferences like Orange, the Global Leadership Summit, and many more. I think the wisdom that Andy has can impact your life in one way or another. So I'm going to do my best to let you into the history of how this Christian leader exemplified stewardship, leadership, and humility while catapulting the modern non-denominational church to what it is today. So at a young age, Andy had big shoes to fill with his father, Charles Stanley, being a prominent First Baptist pastor in Atlanta, Georgia. As Andy grew up, being in the church and reading his Bible was a pretty normal thing to do. He knew all the right things and all the wrong things, and later he would move on and get his master's in Dallas Theological Seminary. Out of college, he quickly followed in his father's footsteps, becoming an associate pastor at the First Baptist Church and ministering to students for, 4 or 5 years. One afternoon, though, came, and for him and his wife, an opportunity arose for them to launch a new campus from his father's church. After carefully praying and considering, they decided that it was their next step to take. But Andy had this desire to build a church that unchurched people loved to attend. Having a worship band that brought in big crowds of people while being pulled in with a sermon that was convicting enough to do something, even if you weren't a believer. With this vision carried out, the church grew exponentially, so much so that it was larger than his father's church, which built up a lot of tension. This tension continued to grow until Andy and his wife were faced with this question: do we stay or do we go? In his books, he talks about how this can be one of the harder questions we ask while leading a ministry. His approach: trust God fully and be willing to go where He's leading you, even when it hurts. Because of his great stewardship, he ended up leaving the First Baptist Church and planting North Point Church, which now serves 118,000 people globally a weekend. Talk about taking something that God has given you and growing it exponentially. Throughout his years of leading this church and his experience, Andy has always gotten what he's doing from the Word. And the word that he stays away from is the word I. He often uses the word we instead. When he is given credit for something, in response he will always point back to the team or the people who made it happen. North Point's success in bringing in so many new believers points out to the people on his team. To the success of his leadership and the knowledge, he always has someone to point to. And I think this is a great quality of a leader. He understands that he's not the smartest person or the most talented person in the room. So he brings that out in others, constantly looking for ways to elevate others with the gifts that God has given them. One of his missions is to develop leaders who lead leaders. Talk about a mouthful. He does this as much as he can, but understanding that there's limitations. So he started his own leadership podcast, where it gives away as much as he can so that others can take what they need to lead their ministries better. I know personally, I've listened to almost everyone I could get my hands on. Like, there's just so much richness to what he has to say, and he's always pointing it back to Jesus, stating that Jesus is the greatest teacher and all authority is given to him. Again, giving credit where credit is due. Currently, he is still the head pastor at North Point Church, and he's about to celebrate his 32nd anniversary with his wife. Throughout the years, him and his father were able to rebuild the relationship that was lost. It took a big step in humility for that. And right now, he's pushing more than ever to help other people know Christ and to take their next steps with him. So, that was a brief history of how a Christian leader exemplified stewardship, leadership, and humility